Imagine you are standing on a riverbank, and your survival, I mean, your literal survival, depends on predicting exactly when millions of salmon are going to just suddenly swarm upstream.
Right, which is an incredible amount of pressure.
Oh, massive pressure. So a modern fisheries biologist might look at, 40 years of temperature data or precipitation charts and satellite imagery to make that call.
Yeah, standard scientific procedure.
Right. But an indigenous elder standing right next to them, they might just look at a wild rose bush, wait for a specific bloom, and know the salmon are days away.
And today in our deep dive, we are looking at why that single rose might actually be, well, the superior data point.
Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. We are so glad you are here with us as the third person in this conversation, because today we are exploring a massive shift in how we define truth and authority.
Yeah, and specifically, who actually gets to tell the story of a community?
Exactly. We are using a really specific framework as our lens today. It is called Alaska Cultural Standard D4.
Right, which is this educational standard that tasks students with gathering oral and written history from their local community.
And then they have to provide an appropriate interpretation of its cultural meaning. But,
Yeah.
Even though this is rooted in Alaska, the implications apply to anyone, anywhere trying to understand human history.
Absolutely, because history is not just a dry list of dates and names. It is a living, breathing ecosystem.
Yeah, it's family memories, it's shifting landscapes, heritage languages, old maps.
It's even changes in how people hunt or harvest, right?
Yeah.
When students in this framework step out of the museum and into an actual community, they realize the historical landscape is just incredibly complex.
Which I think brings up a fundamental distinction we need to establish right away. If history is this massive living web all around you, you can't just walk around picking up facts like seashells.
No, definitely not.
There is a massive gulf between simply collecting information and actually interpreting why it matters.
Yeah, collecting is just logging raw data. It's writing down a temperature on a Tuesday,
Hmm.
or it's noting the year a building was constructed, or recording the GPS coordinates of an old settlement. It's subjective, but it's empty on its own.
It doesn't tell a story.
Exactly. Interpretation is what links that raw data to relational, spiritual, and moral contexts. It answers the crucial question, which is, so what?
Think about it like a family recipe. Collecting information is just reading the list of ingredients. Flour, sugar, butter. You have the raw facts.
But you don't have the meal.
Right. Interpretation is understanding the final picture. It's understanding exactly why that specific meal is served every single year at a deeply meaningful family holiday.
And how it connects to, say, your great-grandparents immigrating.
Yeah, the ingredients alone do not tell you the cultural weight of the meal.
To get that full picture, you need different kinds of evidence, because every type of source provides a completely different lens.
Like written records versus physical things.
Right, written records and historical photographs capture these distinct frozen moments in time. They show you what things look like on one specific afternoon.
Which is useful, sure.
It is, but then you have physical artifacts
Ah.
and places that reveal long-term ecological relationships and really incredible ancestral engineering.
Let's actually look at one of the most mind-blowing examples from the sources on this.
Oh, the weir.
Yeah, researchers found an 11,110-year-old submerged stone fish weir in Shucken Bay, Alaska.
Over 11,000 years old. Just think about that.
It's wild. They used side-scan sonar and remote-operated vehicles to find it underwater. And it isn't just a random pile of rocks sitting on the ocean floor.
No, it is a highly engineered structure. The physics of it are just remarkable.
Oh, so?
Well, the boulder spacing was perfectly calculated by the people who built it millennia ago. It was designed so that non-target species, like smaller fish or species they just didn't want to harvest, could easily escape through the gaps.
Okay, so it filters them out.
Exactly. Meanwhile, it selectively trapped adult salmon during the ebb tide.
It's essentially an automated, sustainable harvesting machine powered entirely by the gravitational pull of the moon.
Which is just a brilliant way to put it. A physical artifact like that weir is a testament to thousands of years of acute generational observation.
Observation of salmon behavior and tidal cycles.
Yeah, it's a scientific record written in stone. But here's the catch. To truly interpret what that weir means, its cultural significance and the management philosophy behind it, you cannot just rely on an archaeologist's sonar data.
You have to actually talk to the descendants of the engineers who built it.
Precisely. The framework we're looking at explicitly elevates elders, culture bearers, families, and tribal organizations as critical primary sources.
They aren't just interview subjects.
No, They are treated as the recognized academic authorities of their traditional knowledge systems, standing shoulder to shoulder with any museum or university archive.
They hold the interpretation. But bringing human sources like elders into an academic setting really forces us to confront a major, deeply ingrained bias in how evidence is traditionally valued.
It does.
I'll be honest, this is a bias I have to fight in my own head. If I'm looking at a 200-year-old ship captain's log, my modern brain just defaults to thinking, well, he wrote it down in ink on paper, so it's a hard, objective fact.
Right, because we trust the written word.
Yeah. Whereas a spoken story passed down for hundreds of years feels, I don't know, like a massive game of telephone. Why is my bias wrong here?
It's such a common assumption, and deconstructing it is really one of the most critical paradigm shifts in this entire curriculum. We have been taught that written sources automatically trump oral knowledge.
Always.
But oral histories are not casual folklore, and they certainly aren't a game of telephone. They're highly structured, rigorously transmitted qualitative data sets.
So how does that transmission actually work? Like, if it's not written down, how do they prevent errors from creeping in over a century?
Through rigorous peer review.
Really?
Yeah, in many indigenous cultures, stories and historical accounts are shared in public communal settings.
Oh, I see.
So if a storyteller gets a detail wrong or omits a crucial location or misrepresents an event, the other elders and knowledge keepers in the room will immediately correct them.
Wow. So it's an active collective auditing process.
Exactly. The transmission protocol is incredibly strict because survival historically depended on that information being perfectly accurate.
And when we compare the actual span of the data, the contrast is wild. I mean, a Western scientist monitoring a coastal region might have, at best, a few decades of instrumental records.
Maybe 40 or 50 years of solid temperature data.
Right. But indigenous observations span centuries, sometimes thousands of years.
Which brings us back to the wild rose you mentioned at the start of our deep dive.
Yes, the sources call these long-term phenological indicators.
That's the academic term, yeah.
But let's strip away the heavy academic jargon for a second. We are essentially talking about using the natural environment as a highly compressed data zip file.
I love that analogy. Because the blooming of a wild rose isn't just a pretty floral event. Think about what a plant requires to bloom.
A lot of different conditions.
Right, it synthesizes soil temperature, ambient air temperature, solar radiation, and precipitation over a period of weeks or months.
It processes all those complex, shifting environmental variables and outputs one clear, observable data point, the bloom.
And indigenous communities tracked that specific bloom because it correlated perfectly with the arrival of specific salmon runs.
It gives us the long-term ecological baseline that a 20-year scientific study simply cannot see.
Because a modern thermometer only tells you the temperature of the water today, the rose tells you how the entire interconnected ecosystem is behaving based on centuries of verified pattern recognition.
That is just mind-blowing. But to actually use and interpret these robust oral histories, you can't just drop an ancient story into a modern Excel spreadsheet.
No, doesn't fit.
Why not?
It doesn't fit because the underlying epistemology is entirely different.
Okay, epistemology is a heavy word. Are we just talking about, like, how we know what we know?
Essentially, yes. It's the framework of your worldview. Western science traditionally uses a reductionist approach.
Meaning you break things down.
Yeah, if you want to understand something, you break it down into its smallest isolated variables and study them in a vacuum. But indigenous epistemologies are generally holistic. They utilize relational systems thinking.
Let's unpack that a bit. Relational systems thinking.
It is the understanding that humans are reciprocal co-participants in nature.
So we aren't outside looking in.
Right, we aren't separate from the environment, standing outside of it, observing and managing it from a distance. We are a thread inside the web. Every action has a ripple effect across the ecosystem.
And the heritage languages themselves hold that specific worldview, right? The sources emphasize that traditional place names aren't just random titles honoring some guy who, quote-unquote, discovered a river.
No, they contain highly localized ecological knowledge. A place name might describe the structural features of the landscape.
Or the specific physics of a water current.
Or the exact animals that migrate through that valley. If you lose the language, you lose the map.
Which forces us to look at a very dark part of this curriculum, because we cannot talk about interpreting community history without looking at how that history was actively and deliberately disrupted.
Yeah, the historical record is definitely not pristine.
The documentation, including texts like Harold Napoleon's Uyarak, requires students to look impartially at the historical trauma of colonization.
And it's heavy stuff. From the 1770s through to the 1940s, a succession of severe epidemics decimated indigenous populations in Alaska.
When a community loses a massive percentage of its elders in a short period, it's not just a human tragedy, it is the equivalent of a library burning down.
Exactly. It causes a massive disruption in the intergenerational transmission of those survival systems and cultural data sets we were just talking about.
And then you add the institutional disruptions on top of that.
Yeah, the sources document the era of boarding schools, which systematically punish students for speaking their heritage languages or practicing their traditions.
Just think about your own family history for a second. Imagine trying to piece together who your family is, what you value, and where you come from.
Right.
But you are only allowed to look at your great-grandmother's tax returns from 1930. Everything else, the letters, the photo albums, the family recipes, the stories, was either confiscated, destroyed, or you were literally punished for talking about it.
You would have a massive intentional void in your history.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had forced relocations and resource development that further physically displaced communities from the lands that held their histories.
So to interpret the history correctly today, you can't just read what's left on the shelves. You must recognize the gaps, and you have to understand exactly why those gaps exist.
And because of this history of extraction, assimilation, and trauma, gathering community knowledge today cannot be treated like a casual weekend homework assignment.
So basically, if a student shows up to an elder's house with their smartphone, hits record, and demands the secret family harvest spots for a school project,
They are going to get kicked out.
yeah, they absolutely should be. A fundamental lesson of this curriculum is that there is no automatic entitlement to someone else's heritage just because you are curious.
Which is a huge shift from the age of the internet, where we just assume all information should be free, searchable, and accessible to everyone instantly.
Right, we just Google things and expect an answer.
But some stories, sacred geographical sites, family-owned harvest locations, or ceremonial practices are deeply private. They belong to specific families or clans.
They aren't for Wikipedia.
No, they are entirely inappropriate for public sharing or for uploading into open educational databases where anyone can just download them.
So how does a student actually gather oral history if so much of it is restricted?
The rules of engagement are incredibly rigorous. First, students and educators must obtain explicit informed consent before recording anything.
Okay, that makes sense.
They also have to ensure that the copyright and the ownership of the knowledge remain firmly with the community, not the school district.
Oh, that's an important distinction.
Very important. And there must be professional compensation, like honorariums, for elders who share their time. You are consulting a visiting professor of their culture, and they should be treated as such.
The sources give a really practical example of what this reciprocity looks like in action. They call it the Tea with Elders protocol.
Right. It's about proving you're there to build a relationship, not just extract a quote.
You don't lead with the microphone. Maybe you show up and do a chore first. Hauling water, splitting wood, shoveling snow. You make yourself useful.
And then you sit down for tea.
And when the conversation starts, you have to practice patient listening. One of the hardest things for modern students to learn is that silences in the conversation aren't dead air that needs to be filled with another question.
The silence is part of the structure. It's processing time. It's deciding what is appropriate to share and how to frame it.
And even after the interview, the process isn't over.
No, there is a strict community review phase. The transcripts are taken back and checked by the original speakers to make sure the accuracy and the context are exactly right before anything is ever published.
With all of those ethical frameworks in place, we reach the final and perhaps most complex stage, which is synthesis.
Right. How do students actually take this incredibly rich, diverse information and create their interpretations?
Because they have to balance things that seem totally opposed. I mean, how do you take the side scan sonar data of a fish weir and combine it with a spoken multi-generational story without just picking one over the other?
It requires a high-level skill called cognitive frame switching.
Okay, what does that look like?
Think of it almost like wearing a pair of 3D glasses where one lens is red and one is blue. You're taught to look through the quantitative lens of Western science.
The GIS coordinates, the sonar data, the instrumental temperature records.
Exactly. Then you look through the relational, value-rich lens of traditional oral histories.
And the goal isn't to force the blue lens to overwrite the red lens.
No, not at all. You learn to hold both worldviews simultaneously. Students learn to compare the sources and notice where they intersect.
They learn to spot missing voices, too.
Yes, and to recognize contradictions between the data sets without panicking and to distinguish raw evidence from cultural interpretation.
So they aren't just memorizing facts for a multiple choice test.
Right. They are critically analyzing the very nature of how knowledge is constructed.
And the products they create from this analysis are honestly amazing. According to the curriculum sources, students are creating cultural atlases.
Oh, those are incredible.
Yeah, these are digital mapping projects where they take standard scientific GIS data and overlay it with traditional place names, historical migration paths, and family harvest routes. It creates a map with just incredible depth.
They're also producing historical engineering reports. Like we discussed with the Shaken Bay Weir, students analyze the tidal mechanisms and the physics of ancient stone structures to prove the sophisticated engineering involved.
They're making audio and visual documentaries, story maps, illustrated field journals. But what I find most compelling is what happens to all this work when it's done.
It doesn't just sit in a drawer.
No, everything they create is respectfully returned to the community. The digital archives aren't just hoarded by the school district on a server somewhere.
They become living resources for the families that shared the knowledge in the first place.
It completely transforms the student from a passive receiver of historical facts into an active, responsible steward of community history.
Which brings us to the core of what we've been uncovering today. History isn't trapped in a glass box.
It is a vibrant, living ecosystem of knowledge that requires immense care to navigate. Doing responsible historical work means that you have to protect the relationships and the communities just as carefully as you preserve the information itself.
You simply cannot separate the knowledge from the people who hold it.
So as we wrap up this exploration, we want to leave you with something to chew on. Look around your own community, your own family.
Consider the world around you. Whose stories shape the history you know?
Whose voices are missing from the narrative you've been taught?
And what responsibilities do you take on when you decide to tell another person's story?